How's it going, guys? Welcome to another awesome ProGuides video. My name is Renox, and today we have a great topic for you guys. In today's video, it's about time that we broke down and gave you a guide on all the commonly used weapons in CSGO. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. But before we start, you didn't think we'd be getting into it before our question of the day now, did you? Of course we wouldn't. And today, why don't you let us know what your favorite game is other than CSGO? Are you an RPG fan? Do you play other shooters like Rainbow Six or maybe Valorant? Or are you a fan of games like Dark Souls, just to mention a few? Be sure to let us know down in the comments and have a chat with anyone with similar tastes. Who knows, you might even find some great recommendations down there. Okay people, now it's really time to dive into the video. I'm going to be breaking this tier list down into 5 distinct sections based on the 5 different tiers of guns that you can use in-game. Working our way from the top, we've got the S tier weapons. The first of which is the AK-47. Undoubtedly the most used weapon in the game, the AK-47 is a staple of the Counter-Strike series and certainly deserves its spots as one of the most loved weapons. We all know that a CT side is going well when you have 5 AKs picked up, with that one-shot potential giving it huge edge over the M4. With the AK, the most effective way to use it outside of close quarters is to fire in short and controlled bursts of 2 to 4 bullets, maximizing your accuracy at long range. Of course, once the distance is closed down, this changes massively. Spray away, but just make sure you're following the recoil control as you do so. The AK has a very distinct and pronounced spray pattern, and mastering it takes time, but once you do, you'll be spraying down multiple enemies with ease. Next up, we've got the counterpart to the AK, the M4A4. The M4A4 is a much more accurate gun and has a much smaller spray pattern than the AK-47, and yet is still easily overpowered by one simple fact: one-taps. That being said, using the M4A4 is largely the same as the AK. Use the same burst firing tactics, but just remember that you need 2 headshots. Using the M4A1 is a different beast, however, and is much more similar to guns like the AUG and the Krieg due to its impressive accuracy. With the M4A1, you can effectively spray from any range and expect to be able to get a kill if controlled properly. Just keep in mind the reduced magazine capacity. Speaking of the Krieg and the AUG, the differences between the two are similar to those between the AK and M4, with the AUG not being able to one-tap from anything other than point-blank range. To use both these guns, make sure you don't rely on the scope too much. Try to mainly use it to hold angles from afar or peek into an AWPer. And remember that scoping makes an audible sound cue for any enemies to hear. Moving on from the assault rifles, we've got probably the most well-known gun in the game. It's the AWP. A guide to using the AWP could be its very own video, but I'll break it down quickly for you. There are 2 main ways to use the AWP, these being instigating and holding. Instigating is how people like Kenny S and Simple use the AWP most of the time. It's peeking angles, making plays, and splitting open rounds aggressively. Holding is how players like Device and Nitro play. A lot more of holding angles and waiting for an easy kill. It can be described as helping your team to win the round, instead of simply going in and winning it for them. Playing in the first way described will result in a lot more flashy highlight clips, but will also be more likely to backfire and cost you dearly. This is why, to be completely proficient with the AWP, you need to find a balance between the 2 playstyles. Taking the right risks at the right time is what makes a good AWPer into a great AWPer. These risks I'm talking about are things like peeking an angle to get an entry or going for an early peek to catch the enemies off guard. Finally, in our S tier category, it's the SCAR-20, the counter-terrorist auto sniper. I'm only putting the CT-sided auto sniper on here for reasons I'll explain later, but the auto sniper on CT is likely the best weapon you can have for holding an angle. And that's exactly how you want to play it. Don't peek angles, just hold them. A CT holding an angle with an auto sniper is easily one of the most difficult things to deal with as an attacker, and the one thing that stops it from being used consistently is its high price and low versatility. Moving down a level, now we've got some of the good guns in CSGO. Not the elite, most favorite guns that are featured in the S tier, but don't worry, these guns will still get you through a full buy round if it comes to it. Starting off again with the assault rifles, we've got 2 of the least used rifles, the Famas and the Galil. What to say about these guns? At their core, they're quite simply downgrades of the M4 and AK. That is to say that the main difference between the guns is similar to the differences between the AK and M4. Whilst the Famas is more accurate, the Galil has higher base damage and armor penetration values. However, the main difference between this pairing when compared to the AK and M4 is that neither one can one-shot somebody with armor. This being said, the best method to use each of these guns remains the same as with the other assault rifles. Burst fire 2 to 4 bullets at mid to long range, and make sure you get the recoil control down for when that distance is closed. Next up, we've got the most mobile of all the rifles, of course being the CSGO, or Scout as it's more commonly called. Using the Scout is a whole different beast to using the AWP, all down to 2 factors: the lower damage and the incredibly fast movement while both scoped and unscoped. This results in 2 things. 1, trying to peek a lot more with the Scout than the AWP. Abuse that high movement speed. Zip in and out of cover taking shots at enemies. Just tagging them makes it miles easier for your team to finish them off as you reduce them to nearly no health. And secondly, don't hold angles statically. By this, I mean if you're holding an angle, jiggle it constantly instead of sitting there holding it. It makes you a much harder target to hit. If the AWP had scoped movement speed as high as the Scouts, then you'd see players holding AWP angles in the exact same way. For our last A-tier weapon, we've got probably the most revered gun in the game, the one and only Desert Eagle. Now, I've put it this far up on the list for 2 main reasons. Whilst it definitely isn't as effective as the Famas and doesn't have damage as high as the Scout, it's less than half the price of both of these guns, and if used correctly, can quite easily win you a round. When you're using the Deagle, there are basically 2 trains of thought to how you should use it. The first is the most common one: play in and out of cover and rake in those 1-deags, sort of using it as an AWP almost. This is extremely effective if your aim is on point and if you put in some good practice with it. However, just make sure not to rule out using it at close range. From anything 500 units or under, the Deagle takes just 2 body shots to kill an armored opponent. 500 units is the equivalent of long corner to doors on Dust 2. Therefore, the Deagle can be very effective if spammed from close range, then taking the opponent's gun. However it's used, the Deagle is a gun that should never be underestimated. In the right hands, it can stop an entire push or crack a bomb site wide open. Moving down again, we've got some of the middling weapons in the hierarchy of the buy menu on the B tier. Kicking us off, we've got some of the better SMGs in the game, the first of which is the P90. The P90 is one of the most hated weapons in the game, yet still does it serve its own unique purpose. For a fast rush, it is inarguably one of the best purchases that you can make, as it isn't too far off from the assault rifles in terms of base damage and armor penetration, and outdoes all of them on fire rate and magazine capacity. Its biggest downside has to be its accuracy. Anything other than mid to close range and you'll quickly regret buying it. Try to make use of its fast movement speed and high running accuracy in something like an Ivy Rush on train or a similar situation. Next up, the other gun fighting for the top spot amongst the SMGs, it's the UMP. The UMP went through a strong phase back in 2017 during SK Gaming's dominance of the pro scene, and they nearly single-handedly popularized its use at all levels of the game. It has been nerfed quite a bit since then, but it still finds itself to be a common pickup on all rounds, from full buys to anti-ecos. It's easily one of the most versatile guns in the game, with great stats across the board from raw damage to accuracy. When using the UMP, make sure you're trying to play close angles, as even though it has good accuracy on it, you will find it much more effective at close range with its high rate of fire. Moving into a whole new class of guns now, it's time to talk all about the shotguns. The 2 best shotguns are for sure the Mag 7 and XM104, commonly referred to as the Auto Shotty. Both of these guns are unrivaled at close range, with the Auto Shotty especially being an absolute monster. With these shotguns, there's one thing to always keep in mind: the closer, the better. Also, make sure to make use of the Mag 7 brilliant jumping accuracy to go for some jump shots. More often than not, you'll find yourself getting a lucky headshot over a wall. For our final gun at the B tier, we've got the T-side auto sniper, the GSG-31. The sole reason it's this low on the list is simply due to what will happen if you lose this gun to the CTs. What will happen, I hear you ask? Quite simply, it will lose you a lot of rounds. Whilst the auto sniper can be effective on T side, it's nowhere near as good as it is on CT, and you don't want to be the one to blame for buying one for the enemy team. On to the C tier now, where the guns aren't necessarily bad, but they are extremely situational. The first ones we've got are the anti-eco weapons, these being the MAC-10, MP7, MP5, or Nova. These are put here as they'll be largely ineffective against armored opponents, but can deal huge damage against an unarmored foe. Each of them dishes out a sizable kill reward too, meaning after a good round, you'll be rolling around in money. The SMGs listed here, you'll want to use as classic run and gun weapons and playing close angles. However, if you know the enemy team just has upgraded pistols, playing mid-range angles is equally as effective. With the Nova, however, you'll mainly want to buy it on CT side, where you can play a very close and unexpected angle. A few examples of this could be close to A ramp on Mirage or in toilets on Overpass. The next C-class weapons are the upper echelon of pistols. These are the 5.7, Tech 9, and the CZ75. Now, if you want to really learn how to use them, head on over to our comprehensive guide to pistols linked in the description. But the quick rundown is to use these guns to kill fully bought opponents and take their rifles from them. Once you've grabbed their gun, the pistol has fulfilled its purpose and can be considered money well spent, even if you didn't win the round. Just think of what a fully bought opponent lost when you killed them, compared to what you would lose if you got killed in that situation. They'll have to rebuy nades, a gun, and armor, whereas you spent probably no more than $1,500. We're getting close to the end now, with this tier containing the last two guns that can be considered as good weapons. The first of these is the P250. Whilst being a fairly decent sidearm, as a primary weapon, the P250 will very rarely get you anywhere besides just one lucky kill, whilst the pistols in C-class have the potential to regularly get you multi-kills if used correctly. However, if we start to think about the P250 on a pistol round, our perspective changes quite a lot. Bought on T side, it will instantly level the playing field with the CTs, providing a one-tap potential for you as well. However, due to its clear inferiority to guns like the 5.7 and CZ, it's relegated down to the D tier. Secondly, we've got the USP and P2000. These guns are here for one reason and one reason only: their price and effectiveness on the pistol round. First up, they're free. For the cost of $0, you get an incredibly accurate gun that can one-tap from quite a long range and isn't too shabby against armor at close range either. Both these weapons have such a clear superiority to the Glock when it comes to pistol rounds that they simply had to be above it. And finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, we've got the worst of the bunch, the E tier. The guns here are as follows: the Glock, Sawed-Off, M249, Bison, Dual Berettas, and lastly, the Negev. Whether they're too pricey like the M249, have terrible armor penetration like the Glock and Bison, or are just plain difficult to use like the Negev and Sawed-Off, these guns are the worst of the worst. With the exception of the Glock on pistol rounds, you never want to be using these weapons. The Sawed-Off deals pretty much 0 damage after about 10 meters, rendering it useless, and has a fire rate too slow to use reliably anyways. The Negev, far too inaccurate at the start of its spray. The M249, far too expensive. The Bison, atrocious damage and armor penetration, and is surrounded by superior weapons for anti-ecos. And finally, the Dualies, the laughingstock of the pistols. With its clear inferiority to pistols such as the P250 and 5.7, there's virtually no reason to ever purchase them. Now, the sharp ones amongst you might have noticed the one gun I missed out, the one and only Revolver. It's been missed out for one simple reason: there's no way this list could go all the way down to the Z tier. Whilst the Revolver isn't necessarily a terrible gun, there is no reason anyone should be choosing it over the Deagle, and that's likely not going to change for a long time. Well, everyone, that is all we have for you today. But be sure to remember that this is only the ProGuides list. You don't have to stick with it religiously. Use it as a rough guide for the guns in-game, and ultimately just find which guns are S-class for you. Anyways, make sure to drop a like and comment with your answer to our question of the day. And if you want more content like this, then hit the subscribe button. Whilst you're at it, if you really want to improve at CSGO, head on over to ProGuides.com for the full coaching experience. That's it for today's video. This has been Renox from ProGuides, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.